As many of you know, and has been already discussed by some during this lunch presentation, we always knew, for those of us that care not only about public transportation, but most acutely the people that use it every day and those that depend on it every day, that we have a policy proposal put forward at the House of Representatives that would basically wipe out access to any reliable funding source for public transportation and quite deliberately put us on a starvation diet where we would be dependent on the most controversial and troubled funding proposals that we put together. The bill, as proposed in the House, literally takes billions of dollars that have already been collected from the taxpayer for mass transportation. We're not talking prospective, we're talking money in the bank that has already been collected for the purposes of public transportation, and shift that money elsewhere to basically give us a baseline budget of zero, so we could then put our tin cup out and hope that people put something into it in the form of controversial oil revenues from drilling in Alaska, oil revenues from drilling in offshore United States, including the states that don't want drilling offshore, Keystone Pipeline proposal, and a whole bunch of other deliberately controversial proposals. It really is the most divisive piece of transportation legislation that many of us have ever seen. Secretary LaHood said that this proposed transportation bill is the worst transportation bill he's seen in 35 years of public service. I cannot say that because I've only had 25 years, but our observations are the same. I could tell you that once we picked ourselves up off the floor, having looked at this legislation, we wasted no time in speaking out against it. Most of us have spent most of the last few weeks sort of excoriating people to get up off the floor. This is not the time to just, stick your hands up in the air. It's the time to start talking to people. One of the reasons, and I don't want to be self-critical of the community of transit advocates, but it needs to be said. When something like this happens, we need to reflect on how it happened and how it could possibly happen. If it's this surprising, how did we unknowingly get to a place? We always knew that we were not going to be completely in sync with whatever the House Republican leadership put together. But to literally to throw us on the floor, or to use any analogy you want, throw us off the bus, throw us under the bus. You could use the whole bunch making those up. But my point is, we need to think about how it was that such a reckless and reactionary proposal could come forward. And the reality is we deserve some of the fault ourselves. And by that I mean not only advocates in this room, but transit agencies across the country, transit operators across the country, who frankly have grown into a place of extraordinary complacency. We have been able to ride the wave, if you will, ever since Ronald Reagan signed the Mass Transit Account of the Trust Fund into law over 30 years ago. And then adjustments were made on the with the support of people like Senator Frank Lautenberg and others who's still serving in the Senate to increase our share of the gas tax. We have pretty much been riding the wave. A reauthorization of major transportation programs comes down. It's time to do it. We may argue about whether transit will get 20% versus 18% versus 22%. But we've never really had the argument, or haven't really had to make the case of whether it should be 20% or 0%. And as such, we spend a lot of time talking to each other, go to workshops about how to do better by what we've got. And while gas tax revenues were increasing, and Congress's appetite for increased funding for transportation continued to grow, transit got its share. So we haven't had the fundamental debate on the role of transit in Washington really in over 30 years. And that's where we find ourselves today. Now, I will tell you, obviously, for those folks who've been following the headlines, things are not all bad. which is to say there's a Senate version of legislation that's currently being debated in the Senate, which is a great deal more even-handed. It is being supported by Democrats and Republicans alike. And most importantly, from our perspective, there's an alternative vision on how to fund this, and that is the vision that President Obama has put forward in his budget this year. Unlike past years, the President has articulated with clarity how he would pay for transportation, a robust, adequately funded, balanced transportation bill over the next 6 years. It effectively takes the savings that we're expecting from our drawdown and activities in Iraq and Afghanistan, and takes half of that money to reduce the deficit, and takes the other half and puts it right into investments in transportation, both highways, transit, all of our safety initiatives, and it's enough. So we're not in a debate about whether it should be paid for or not. The President has articulated how he would pay for it. The House has articulated how they would pay for it. The Senate has articulated how they would pay for it. What we're now in the discussion is where does that money go and how much there'll be. So we've pierced through a lot of that. And frankly, while some of us have been heartened to see that the House was not prepared to move their, like I said, what I refer to as a reckless and reactionary proposal forward at this time, no one should take any comfort that we are out of the woods yet. I learned long ago working on legislation, you don't celebrate something until you see the alternative. We haven't seen an alternative from the House of Representatives. And, one bill that just knocks you down on the floor, the next one could be digging us a hole. So let's wait and see what's really being served up before we celebrate anything. The only way we're going to do this is by getting past the complacency we've had over the last 3 years and talking directly to the people that are making these decisions. That is Democrats and Republicans alike. One of the things I've said a great deal in the last few weeks, I think some of the members who came up with this proposal just thought that they were insulting somebody in a neighboring congressional district. In fact, the face of transit has changed dramatically over the last 30 years. Do we continue to serve transit-dependent communities of need in urban environments? You bet. But we're doing a lot more than that with federal transportation dollars. We have everything from the transit-dependent transit user who doesn't own a car and is dependent on public transportation to get wherever they need to go, be it work, church, a hospital, medical appointment, shopping. You also have a lot of choice users. A lot of people of means who have a car that they leave in the in their parking space, or they leave it in a driveway at home, and they're getting on a commuter bus, conveniently doing their email, going into work in the morning, and do their email coming out of work in the evening, and it's really quite convenient. And their bus goes away as quickly as everyone else's bus under the House's proposal. Like I said, I think some of these people thought they were insulting somebody else, when in fact they're insulting their own constituents in their own backyard. And that's something that needs to be pointed out to everybody. It may have been a divide and conquer strategy, and we have to make sure that they don't succeed. Let me talk a little bit, a few other things about the President's alternative proposal that he has in his budget. Like I said, the most important breakthrough in the President's budget was identifying a pay-for, so we could argue with credibility that you have one way of paying for it, we have another way of paying for it. And let me tell you, our way of paying for it is not some wild, controversial scheme. It is precisely some of the same pay-for that the Republicans put in Congressman Ryan's budget that they all voted for last year. They just wanted to use that funding for something else. We'd like to use it for deficit reduction and infrastructure investment. Other elements about it, that over that 6-year period, federal funding for transit would more than double. It would grow to grow by 105% over those years. It's 20% more funding than we had during the safety loop period, but importantly, it has other critical priorities built within it. One of those, which I know you'll be talking about later, is having flexibility for additional federal operating assistance, so we're not buying more buses while laying off drivers who need to drive. have always said that we need to address this operating assistance question with our eyes wide open. And for too long, federal decision makers just want to say that operating funding was someone else's problem. And we actually have a scenario emerging currently, which this country has had before. The oil companies jack up gas prices. Transit agencies, who must pay the gas price, are suddenly facing costs that they weren't anticipating. So while our ridership grows because of increasing gas prices, our ability to serve those people goes down. And we're literally parking buses at a time when the demand for them has never been higher. There's no logic in that. And that's why we have a proposal in our budget for temporary targeted operating assistance. We know that there are other proposals out there, somewhat similar, some of them different from ours. One of them has been championed by Russ Carnahan, and I really commend you for the decision that you all collectively made to honor him today. Other priorities that are within the President's budget is one for transit safety. It's a very high priority for me and my agency at this time. Am I going over my time?
We're the 1 minute warning.
We're the 1 minute warning.
That was my key.
I can do this quickly, really quickly. Transit safety is actually an equity issue. At present, we have very voluminous federal oversight and federal regulation of aviation. We have it for trucking. We have it as it relates to the operations of motor vehicles, and we don't have it for transit safety. Literally, my agency is prohibited by law from issuing safety regulations, and that is something that we're attempting to overcome. I'm going to go over a couple of other things very quickly. I should say that one of the things that the President has reiterated in his budget is funding for the American Jobs Act. He has reiterated his call for that. He has paid for that. And that provision, again, includes the targeted hiring language that we proposed last year. Two other important initiatives that the FTA has taken over the last year. We have provided what we think is long overdue clarity in terms of the application of our environmental justice and civil rights Title VI rules. We could have a rich debate in here probably over whether the lack of clarity and the almost deliberate vagueness that you found in those regulations before was deliberate or not. But the point is, they're no longer going to be vague. There will be no longer any confusion, and there can no longer be any confusion on the part of transit operators of what is required of them, either when they're cutting service or when they're adding service. Finally, I'll finish by explaining that in our New Starts program, where we build out additional transit capacity, we have finally rectified issues in terms of moving to a much more balanced approach of what the benefits are that we will prize when making those funding decisions. This was really born out of the issues that we encountered, and many of you were involved in the light rail system between Minneapolis and St. Paul, where we literally were putting money into the largest public works process. He's standing here. I was going to move it over here. Getting out my vote. But it is a very, very important initiative which grew out of our observation about us building the largest light rail system and the largest public works process in bridging Minneapolis and St. Paul, and not building 3 stations in the heart of the African American and Asian American community because it ran afoul of the Bush administration's cost effectiveness test. We rescinded that test. We've put in our new rules now. They're out for comment, and we commend those to your attention too. So sorry for running over. I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me.